we'll get started here, and anyone else will be able to join in. But just a recap for those who are here and those who may not have been here last week, as we're looking at one of the preeminent modern Bible scholars, Nachama Liebowitz. I'll ask if anyone remembers. We shared, I think, at the beginning of last week, things that we knew about Nachama Liebowitz. And in turn, if anyone remembers any of the characteristics of her methodology of exploring the Bible, exploring the Torah. Anyone? I can do a quick review here. As we talked about last week, Nachama Liebowitz came from Riga, Latvia, made Aliyah in Mandate Palestine, and became a scholar, with starting at teaching at a teacher's seminary. Her start was really writing these worksheets, simply with questions about the parsha to get people thinking. And the breadth of knowledge and wisdom that were in those sheets, built a following that encompassed everyone from the most secular to the most religious, and really one of very few, if really, there's not really anyone else. I don't know, Ruth, if you can think of anyone. There's not really many people in the Jewish world that have such a wide audience in terms of spectrum of background and belief and diversity of Jewish background and observance. And yet she spoke to a very, very wide range. Everyone from the Israeli soldier to the Chiloni, to the secular kibbutznik, to the Haredi studying in yeshiva in Jerusalem or in Bnei Brak. Yeah, Ruth, did you?
No, I think my mother used to take classes with her. Might have been on the radio, because I don't think she went somewhere.
So later on, she became on syndication and actually taught on the radio. And actually, one thing, I think I mentioned this, but I'll share two things, and then we'll look at one of her teachings here. Well, two things. One, she made a point of claiming that nothing was her own. I would probably disagree with that. But she pulled from the breadth of sources, and commentary on texts, to pit one against the other. So her voice became implicit in the commentaries, but her voice wasn't necessarily, outright. She didn't add her own words per se. She used the commentaries to let you understand what she was thinking. And she asked questions rather than give answers. She asked questions that help you arrive at the answer, at where she felt, we should arrive at. But by asking questions and not by giving doctrine, she was able to bring in people that would otherwise probably never sit at the same table together when it came to Bible study or Torah study, and have them all feel as though she was speaking to them, and did a phenomenal job. So last week we looked at one text, and I'll remind you the way she went about teaching, the way she went about studying. I was really, I shared with you four, major elements of her approach. The first was the kushya, the challenge. What was driving the commentator to say what they were saying? Jackie, did you want to say something?
No.
Okay, that's fine. So the kushya, she was right. What is bothering Rashi is probably her most famous line in her studies. What prompted Rashi to say what he said? And we looked at a story, a text from the building of the Mishkan last week. Second is to look at what different commentators have said about a particular verse, a particular subject matter? And why is Rashi different from, say, Maimonides, or different from Rashbam, or any of the other classical commentators, or for that matter, contemporary commentators, or the Midrash? What is different between their answers and their commentary? And then third, and this is where she sometimes got in trouble from kind of a more traditional bent, and I know Terry, you asked a question about this as well. What are the pluses and minuses of each commentator? And she was willing to ask that question, and she was both willing to hear responses and also willing to say that these commentators were so brilliant that they knew the pluses and minuses. We're just, determining what they already knew. And in that way was able to get people that were maybe less ready to say there could be something wrong with Rashi, God forbid. She would say, no, Rashi knew that there was a challenge. Rashi just felt that this was the best possible explanation. And finally, using all of that knowledge, she would want her students to come up with an answer to the question, what meaning does this biblical verse and its commentary have for us today? What insight do we gain? And for her, it was about the Torah, it was about the text, but it was also about how the text informs our own lives and our own understanding. So I want to look here at a verse. I realized here, just a sec, I'm gonna put, and please, if there's any particular verses or particular parshiot that you're interested in looking at, let me know. But I'm going to look here. We're on verse, I'm going to put it in Hebrew and English. It seems to just be in Hebrew right now. But Ruth, do you want to read here line 4? This is Genesis chapter 33, verse 4.
Yeah. וירוץ עשיו לקראתו, ויחבקהו, ויפול על צוואריו, וישקהו, ויבכו.
Good, thank you. And is there someone maybe that wants to read it in English? Jackie, did you want? Jackie?
Yep.
You want to read? Yeah.
Sure. Esau ran to greet him. He embraced him, and falling on his neck, he kissed him, and they wept.
Okay, thank you. So before we explore what Nachama Liebowitz does with this verse and how she explores it in commentaries, can anyone share, what the context of this verse is? Terry, do you want to share? Or
it's when Yaakov, after his overnight and then separating all his family and crossed the river and was sending all these people and animals before him, and then he's finally at the end and meeting Esau, and had been so scared about how he would be.
Right. Thank you. So I'll jump a little further back, but that's exactly right. When Yaakov and Esav were younger, teenagers, Yaakov, impersonates Esav and gets the blessing that was intended for Esav. And Esav says to himself, when my father dies, I'm going to kill Esav, right? And when my father is not around, Esav says, I'm going to kill Yaakov. So now 20 years have passed. Jacob has fled town, has gotten married, has kids. The first time in 20 years, here, Jacob is about to see his brother, Esav, and the last time that he was around Esav wanted to kill him. So I think justifiably, based on our understanding of the text, Jacob is very scared. He's about to see Esau. This is someone who wanted to kill him. And he splits his camp into two, saying if Esav attacks one and his men attack one camp, at least the others will flee and be able to escape. Jacob stays behind, and according to the text, wrestles with an angel and is victorious, and ultimately comes. And what happens is that when he comes to meet Esav, Esav runs to greet him, embraces him, falling on his neck, and kisses him, and they wept. So despite all of the fear, this is what happens. And you'll notice in the Hebrew, this second to last word in the Hebrew line, vayishakehu, you notice dots above each letter of the word. Does everyone see those dots?
Mm-hmm.
So those dots actually appear in the Torah. They're one of a number of places. They're not that common, but there are some other places in the Torah, and you can look at another time the meaning of those, the meaning of the dots in the different places. But generally, the dots are there. The dots were added around 1,000 years ago, the 10th century, by a group of people known as the Masoretes. They lived in northern Israel, Tiberias, and the area around the Kinneret. And this was a whole school of students that punctuated the text. Before this group about 1,000 years ago, the text did not have vowels. People just knew how to, we could say people knew how to recite it, but the Masoretes went through this process that we would make sure to know how to pronounce all of the words in the text. They also added the trope, the cantillation marks that we still use to this day in chanting the Torah. And then certain places where they had some question or doubt or skepticism about something in the text, that led them to put these dots over. And so maybe someone can share here what might lead them. We said it already, but what might have led the Masoretes to put these dots over this word that they embraced, that they kissed?
Well, it might imply that what Asaph did maybe was a pretense, and he did not feel that accepting of Yaakov.
Right, thank you. So the Masoretes, understandably based both on the text itself, which says, 20 years earlier, Asaph wanted to kill him. How could it be, right? Is there some pretense here? Is this really what's happening? The Midrash actually goes to great length to paint Esau as a villain, essentially. In fact, much more so. Esau really is not presented so much as a villain in the text, but we think of him as a villain maybe because we're shaded by the Midrash, we're shaded by the commentary that paints Esav as the father of Edom, which becomes Rome, and he's kind of the father of the Roman Empire, which ultimately destroys the temple. But all of that is not in the text itself. That's all later commentary in Midrash. And so the Masoretes are also probably shaded by later commentary and interpretation. So, Ruth, did you have something to share?
No, I have a question. And what did they think it should have been written? It should have said.
Well, in this case, we don't know. Look, we don't have notes from the Masoretes on why they put the dots. The dots don't necessarily mean they think the word was written incorrectly. They inherit a tradition, and they were the ones who but they looked at all of the manuscripts before them and said, no, this is the word, or this appears to be the word. It seems like they just questioned how this could be happening.
Okay.
I don't
They're
think
editing.
there are other places in the text, and this is just a quick aside. We talk about the Torah as, in fact, the commentaries say every single word is, there's no such thing as a superfluous word, and every word is imbued with tremendous meaning. But the reality is, especially before printing, now we still copy, of course, the Torah by hand, from one scribe is copying from another Sefer Torah. But today, we have tools that have the text on a computer that you can look at and compare and make sure there's no mistakes. The reality is that before the printing press, if a scribe misread a letter or there was a smudge, a vav could become a yud, or a dalid could become a resh. A lot of letters in Hebrew are fairly similar to one another. And there are examples, there is now a standardized text that everyone uses, which it comes from the Masoretes, but there are manuscripts, if you go back far enough, that do have very small variations here and there, most likely because a scribe, either miswrote something or was copying from a Torah that was older and had a smudge and one letter looked different. I'll give you, this is not an example in the Torah, but we say, Baruch Kavod Adonai Mimkamo. Who's heard those words in the Kedusha? Scholars look at that. Literally, it means blessed is the glory of God from God's place. Scholars look and actually think that this was a literary scholars believe that this was a writing, and the first word Baruch really should be Berom or Berum. And Romimu, it means hovering above. Barom, hovering above in the clouds or in the sky, is God's glory from its place up in the sky. And scholars will point, modern literary scholars will point to why, it should be that it probably should be not Baruch, but Berom, from its place. And I think sometimes of even music lyrics that we learn the wrong way because the word sounds like another word. And then I can think of, like, I learned many years later that I was singing a song wrong because I heard it incorrectly and just learned it the wrong way. So it can certainly happen. And we know also from Ashrei, the nun, there's no line in the Ashrei. It's an acrostic poem, an acrostic, that starts Aleph, that goes Aleph to Taf. And yet nun is missing. Was nun missing from the outset? Probably not. There probably was a nun verse. In fact, there are some commentaries that claim to know what the nun verse is and share the nun verse. We don't know if the commentary is correct or not. But the nun is for Ne'eman, by the way, in the commentary of what the nun verse should be. But things did get lost, and it's possible when things were handwritten from generation to generation, scribe to scribe, we may not know for sure. In this case, we don't know. Vayishakehu probably was the original word. There's no way to verify that per se, but it's more that the Masoretes are surprised, how is it possible? So we're going to look, we will start. I'm going to read from Nachama Liebowitz. This is from Ramban, from Nachmanides, who lived around the 12th century, the grandson of Maimonides. And this is just about kind of how Esau is pictured next to Jacob by our commentators. This is kind of an example. Jacob wished to avoid fraternizing with his brother, and our sages extracted a message from this. When Rabbi Yanai went to meet the authorities, he used to take heed of this chapter and did not have the Romans escort him on his way. Once he paid no heed to this chapter and had the Romans escort him, whereupon he did not reach Akko, till he had sold the coat off his back. So what's happening here? Rabbi Yanai lived under Roman rule, and he learned from this verse, because Esau is seen as the ancestor of the Romans, that he shouldn't have the Romans escort him. And everything was fine until one time he decided to let the Romans escort him. And what happened? He was, he was robbed. Everything was taken from him. So this is Nachmanides kind of, not in the Torah itself, but kind of making a point of how bad Esau was, that he kind of was the progenitor of this Roman Empire that was so horrible. At least from a Jewish perspective. I don't know how many of you have been to Rome and seen the Arch of Titus, which depicts the Romans carrying off the menorah and all of the vestibule, the vestitures of the temple. So here, I'm going to place, I'm going to put the next source here. This is the first source that, that Nachama Liebowitz uses here. And this is from the Midrash. Bereshit Rabbah 78:12. Let me. In just a second, I'm going to share the screen. I have someone that wants to read here. Maybe Terry, do you want to?
Jacob said,
you know what? I'm going to jump down a little. Just a second. I'm looking for the right spot here. One second. Came to the wrong spot in the.
hmm. 12.
Now, you know what? I'm going to read, for some reason, this is not the right. I'll have you read the next source. I'll read this one from here, and then I'll have you read the next source. But this is from the Midrash. Bereshit Rabbah, a little after the time of the Masoretes. Rabbi Shimon ben Eliezer, wherever you find that the letters outnumber the vocal points, you expound the letters. Where the points outnumber the letters, you expound the points. Here, the letters do not outnumber the points, nor the points the letters. So what he's describing is times where there are dots, points, above the letters. In this case, the number of points, the number of dots are equal to the number of letters in the word. This teaches that Esav's compassion was aroused at that moment, the moment that he kissed him with all his heart. Said Rabbi Yanai to him, "Why then is the word pointed above? But we must understand that he came not to kiss him, nashko, but to bite him, nashcho." The word for kiss, neshika, is very similar to the word for bite, neshicha. The only difference is the ka, the kuf at the end, versus the cha, the chaf at the end. The cha at the end. Good. Whereupon the patriarch Jacob's neck turned to marble, setting that wicked man's teeth on edge. What then is the implication of the phrase, "and they wept"? Because at the end of the verse, you remember they wept. This one wept on his neck, and the other on account of his teeth. So Jacob is weeping that his neck has turned to marble, and Esav is weeping on the fact that his teeth are hurt because they bit into the marble. So any thoughts on this commentary? There's actually kind of two messages here in the Midrash. One is this notion from Rabbi Shimon ben Eliezer that at this moment, just this one moment, Esau was motivated by hatred, but this one moment was motivated by pure love. And the second interpretation by Rabbi Yanai, saying that no, this really isn't a kiss. It really should have said he bit him or he attempted to bite him, but his neck turned to marble. Any thoughts on these, on either of these commentaries?
Well, usually whoever has kind of the last commentary, who does the writing, there's editing that's going on, and their own feelings are driving what they
Yeah.
do. So depending on, the view of the person who wrote it down, that's what we end up with.
Okay. Right, we do. So that's true. There is editing going on here. And maybe that's the last message they want us to take from this.
Well,
yeah.
aren't they just biased and prejudiced? Esau's evil, so anything he does is not like a normal human being who may really be excited to see his brother who hasn't seen for a long time. Everything he does has to be evil.
Good. So, right. So it's interesting. And Bernard, I think it's interesting, even the positive commentary about Esav, that at this moment, his love and compassion was aroused, implies that outside of this one moment, he was evil. So even the positive one, that the commentaries are definitely shaded by this idea that Esav is evil, right? And they don't seem to be able to even fathom a world, that Esav is not evil. Is that what you're
Yeah.
saying? So no, I think that's definitely true. Here, I'm gonna, Judy?
Yeah, so what does this second rabbi actually understand from the idea of what he was excited? How did he take the excitement part?
You're saying the first part, how does he understand that he rushed towards him?
No, isn't there a word about he was excited? I thought you read excited also.
Well, it's Vayarotz Esav likrato. Esav ran to meet him.
Oh,
So
that's all it is? Okay.
that's all it is. So you could understand that as excited to see him. You could also conceivably understand that as excited to kill him, right? excited to run and destroy him. So this is the words actually I pulled up. This is the English here. And what I wanted to continue, this is Tanchuma Vayishlach. This is further commentary, Midrash on this. Maybe, Terry, do you want to read here, Tanchuma Vayishlach?
Okay. Esau sought to bite him, but his neck turned to marble. This is the reason for the points, indicating that his kiss was not a sincere one. Why did they both weep? To what may this be compared? To a wolf which came to snatch a ram, whereupon the ram began butting it with its horns, and the wolf's teeth became entangled in them. Both of them wept, the wolf on account of its impotence, and the ram for fear its enemy might try again to kill him. So too here with Esau and Jacob. Esau wept because Jacob's neck had turned to marble, and Jacob for fear that Esau might return to bite him. Regarding Jacob, we have the text, "Your neck is as a tower of marble," Song of Songs. Regarding Esau, you have broken the teeth of the wicked. Psalm.
Okay, thank you. This commentary, right, even puts the Midrash, brings text from the Bible to support the Midrash, which is a common tactic within the Midrash. So at Nachama Liebowitz, and I'm going to read here what she says, looking at these two competing visions or versions of what actually took place in this verse, and trying to understand these points, these dots on the letters. She states, right, two views are expressed regarding Esav's conduct. An optimistic one that saw a revolutionary change for the better, and a pessimistic one that detected the old Esav behind it. And she goes on, as she does, she's pulling in more sources. Gloria, were you going to share something? Or did you want to say something? Oh, okay. So we're gonna look at a few more sources that bring in these opposing views, because she really wants to hammer home the point that there are kind of two ways that Jewish tradition sees this kiss, this embrace. One, Jewish tradition kind of generally feels Esav is not the best character and leads to Rome, which ultimately destroys the temple. But she sees there's this one possibility that there's a revolution, that Esav has changed and is moving towards the good. And there's this one vision that says Esav is always bad and can never change. And I want to extrapolate from Esav, because Esav is the archetypal enemy, the archetypal villain, that we could even say villains are always going to be villains, or villains have the ability to revolutionize themselves and work towards the better. So from this verse, she's playing with these two commentaries to see a much bigger meta idea. So I'm going to share the screen again. This is another Midrash from contemporary, probably a little after the Masoretes, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. Bernard, do you want to read here?
When Jacob came to the land of Canaan, Esau came to meet him from Mount Seir, full of fury, bent on killing him, as it is written, the wicked plot against the righteous, and gnash at him with his teeth. Psalm 37. Esau said, I will not slay Jacob with bow and arrows, but I will rather slay him with my mouth and suck his blood, as it is said. And Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Read not and kissed him, but he bit him. Whereupon,
Neshika versus Neshicha, right.
whereupon Jacob's neck turned to marble, and as soon as Esau perceived that he had not accomplished his desire, he became furious and gnashed his teeth, as it is said, the wicked shall see and be vexed. He shall gnash with his teeth and melt away.
Okay, thank you. So, and I'll share just so that's another kind of bringing home the point of the evil. It will always be there. And I'll share another Avot de Rabbi Natan, and I'll just read this. Who comes out on the other side, says, could this have been a kiss of love? Rabbi Shimon ben Eliezer said, but surely all Esau's deeds were motivated by hate, except this one, which was inspired by love. And so the commentaries are mixed on what actually is going on here. About half, and it's oftentimes the commentary is all kind of generally saying about the same thing. Here the commentary is roughly split in half. Half saying that this was really a true kiss and embrace and was motivated by love, and half saying, no, we can't be reading this right. It actually should say, and he bit him, neshi vayeshichehu, or whatever, that he bit him, and that really he's trying to kill him. So I guess any thoughts? Yeah, Gloria.
What do you teach the children in the school about this saying?
What do we teach? I always, well, when we teach the story, we teach the story is that they do embrace after this time. And I guess from a, personally, I like the idea that people can change and change for the better. And that speaks to my worldview, maybe, it might not always be the reality. But we do teach when we teach the story that they come together and they embrace it. And that really is actually the plain meaning of the text here.
That's what I always thought.
Oh, good, yes.
I'm just hearing
Yeah.
something different.
But good. Terry, and then, yeah, Terry.
So, I don't know the Hebrew to know what word is neck. I guess I've heard the story many times and had never understood the midrash, but I'm like wondering, of course we don't know the ancient traditions, but normally you kiss on the cheeks. Like I'm almost wondering how much it was not only the missing letter, but also the context, if it's literally saying he kissed the neck, unless that was a tradition back then rather than the cheek.
So it's an interesting question, and I need to look at a lexicon. I'm not an expert. It does say vayipol al tzavarav. Tzavar is the neck. Ruth, is that what you were going to say?
Yeah.
So the word here is neck, but that may be the word, and I need to check because it actually, there are phraseology. One of a common phrase in biblical Hebrew is that people fall upon they fall on their faces, meaning when something goes bad, vayipol al panav, they fell on their faces almost in mourning or in despair. So that's actually the words used. So falling on his neck may be simply a saying. I need to look where else it's used.
It's like
I don't know, Ruth, if you know any other.
I think it's a meaning of a hug. He hugged him. He gave him a hug.
Well, it does say so.
Vayechabkehu is
So it may be that he hugged him.
he hugged him. Vayechabkehu is hugged him, and as he hugged him, he must have reached his neck.
So it could be. You're right. It does say that he hugged him and he kissed him. He hugged him and he fell on his neck and he kissed him. So it could be because he's coming to hug. That could be. Jacqueline and then
Yep.
Judy, yeah,
Reb,
Jacqueline. first. Oh,
You're talking to me?
Jacqueline, yeah.
Uh, the only place I could see the biting of the neck, I think of something that was a challenge to a fight in southern Italy, but that was much later. So I can't see. I've always felt that Esau got a bum rap. I always felt that, actually Jacob did very deceptive things and nasty things at his mother's direction. But I felt that Esau got it was bad. He was cheated.
No, it's true, right? Esav, I agree with you. Esav does get a bad rap in the text, and probably unfairly. But if you just read the Torah itself, but the commentary is, wants. In some ways, the commentary wants to show. I mean, at the end of the day, Jacob is our forefather. Yaakov is our forefather. The commentators had a vested interest in depicting Jacob as good, as the ultimate good, and Esav as the ultimate evil. I will share that I had a teacher at the Jewish Theological Seminary who had a class that he entitled, he was given leeway to give his class, and he called it Jacob the Wicked. He actually called it was Jacob the Wicked, ? And he said on the first day that he was tempted. He really wanted to just name it Jacob the Wicked without the question mark, because Jacob is actually in many places in the Torah a questionable character. He felt like if he didn't put the question mark, he wasn't sure that they would have allowed him to teach the class. So he put the question mark in to the class title. But our viewing of Esav as evil and Jacob as good is a reflection throughout history and reflection of the ages. Much of what Jacob actually does, is questionable, and much of what Esav does is understandable. I mean, it's not, you don't see Esav as this evil figure in the text itself.
When somebody does something that they shouldn't do, they very often try to project it on somebody else. And I get that feeling a lot with Esav. They done him wrong, and somehow they're looking for a way to project it onto Jacob, and forget the fact that Jacob was the one who was wronging Esau.
Yeah, no, thank you. Judy, did you have?
Yes, I was just wondering, what was the description when Joseph finally reunites with his brothers, when he reveals himself? Is there any description of how
So good.
they...
So I was in the moment, but Terry actually, so I don't know everything in the lexicon, but Terry mentioned when else was this terminology used. And Nachama Liebowitz actually later, in this section actually does share a few instances where it is used for us to compare. So I will share some of those words. And actually, right at the end, there are 2 times where she actually quotes this exact same phraseology that someone fell on someone else's neck and they kissed and wept. And they're both dealing with Joseph. First, Genesis chapter 45, verse 14, and he, Joseph, fell on the neck of Benjamin, his brother, and wept. And this is a positive. This is Joseph seeing his brother and revealing his identity, and this is his only full sibling. And then right in the next chapter, the same, phraseology in chapter 46, Jacob with Joseph, Jacob coming to see, Joseph, who he thought was gone for so many years, and Joseph harnessed his chariot, and he presented himself unto Jacob, and he fell on his neck. So Joseph falls on Jacob's neck and wept on his neck a good while. So Terry, in answer, these are the 2, examples of falling on the neck that she brings up. Both are positive. Both are clearly, this loving embrace after a long absence. In fact, this case too is also after a long absence, where 2 people haven't seen each other. They fall on their necks and they embrace and they weep.
It's sincere.
So in the other cases, and that's, you know, a point that when she brings these up, seems to be leading us to, right? that these other cases are sincere. Now I will share, because I don't know if I have the text online, but the optimistic view of Esav is reflected. I want to share one of the more contemporary, not today, but from the 1800s, Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, who is another source that the Nachama Liebowitz quotes from fairly frequently. He was a prominent German rabbi in the mid-1800s and really seen as the founder or one of the early leaders in what we today might call modern Orthodoxy. Was traditionally observant, but felt that you needed to both be, in order to live in the modern world, you needed to find a pathway that you could live, you know, you could both be traditionally observant and be in the modern world. In some way also, you know, leading the groundwork to the conservative movement and other, you know, groups that feel like we want to find the right path between living in the modern world and living an authentic, observant Jewish life. And he actually takes the optimistic view. The allusion to weeping is a sure sign that what we have here is a revelation of genuine humanity. A kiss can be superficial, but an outburst of tears is a strong presumption in favor of sincerity. Esav betrays his Abrahamic origins and shows himself as not merely a cruel hunter. Otherwise, he could never have reached such a leading position in the development of mankind. The sword alone, brute force, cannot accomplish this. Even Esav gradually relinquishes his sword and begins to feel the cords of human love. It is Jacob who usually provides him with the opportunity for showing his innate humanity. When the strong respects the strong, this is discretion. But when the strong, i.e. Esau falls on the neck of the weak, of Jacob, and casts his sword away, then we know that humanity and justice have prevailed. So in his view, right, that this moment is a moment that of humanity and justice prevailing over living by the sword, over, you know, the tendency towards war and towards conquest.
That's the one I would follow.
Good, that's right. So I tend to like Samson Raphael Hirsch's position, and Ha'emek Davar, which is contemporary with Samson Raphael Hirsch, says similarly, both wept, implying that Jacob's love too was aroused towards Esav, and so it is in all ages. Whenever the seed of Esau is prompted by sincere motives to acknowledge and respect the seed of Israel, then we too are moved to acknowledge Esau, for he is our brother. As a parallel, we may cite the true friendship that existed between Rabbi Judah Yehuda Hanasi and the Roman Emperor Antoninus, and there are many similar instances. So, you know, as we get closer to modern times, and these are 19th century, early 20th century now, there's certainly a desire amongst more contemporary commentators to move towards that second view, which at least I like to believe. I don't know, you know, what your thoughts are here, but this desire to want to believe that Esav has the capability of good, has the potential for good within him. Yeah, Terry, did you want to?
I think as I hear that, it's that whole context in those different countries after Napoleon that they started allowing Jews to have surnames and be part of their communities. And so that, and many of those countries were Catholic, Roman Catholic. So it just, to me, sounds like very contemporary statements, in that they're not really talking about the Esau of the story. They're talking about the Esau that are the people that are the descendants of the view of the Christians and its source of power and Roman Empire stuff.
So great. This verse for the commentator, for the reader throughout history, is not solely about Jacob and Esau, the actual historical people, right? It's about Jacob representing the Jewish people and Esau representing our neighbors, right? Whether it be the Romans or the Roman Catholics.
They're prototypes.
The prototype, right? The prototype for the neighbor. And interestingly, right, these are commentators that live post-Napoleon, right? Napoleon and the French Revolution, you know, automatically granted citizenship to the Jewish people, which was something unheard of prior. The earlier commentators are living in a world where Jews don't have any rights in the lands, or have minimal rights, you know, in the lands that they're living. And so it's maybe, when we put it in that historical context, easier to see how the earlier commentators might feel like, oh, Esav is motivated fully by evil all the time. And of course, this was a bite. And even if you think it was good, it was the only good thing he might have ever done, and everything else was evil, even at its best. But living at a time where Jews are recognized, you know, in the communities, and Samson Raphael Hirsch was at a time where Jews were actually fighting to gain the same rights that he saw across the border in France. He was in Germany, you know, fighting for these rights, was trying to show that the other was not so bad, right? The other had the potential for good. So yeah, Bernard?
Nothing to add at the moment.
Oh, okay. Okay, I look like you, sorry. So good. So Terry, we'll look quickly at this source, Beno Jacob, who actually pulls the different verses where there's similar language. The description here, if you see on the screen, oh, sorry. Yep. Just a second. It's frustrating sometimes. But Beno Jacob, the description in Genesis 33:4 of Esav running, embracing, falling, kissing, and weeping is suspect. Jacob himself did not believe his sincerity. That is why he immediately declines Esav's offer to escort him. Jacob went his own way alone. Esav turned to Seir. Jacob's home was elsewhere in the land of Canaan, but the day would come when Esav, and there are many types of Esavs, would come to Jacob and Mount Zion. He later comments, though, so I'll read here. He compares the texts. So Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. This is Genesis 29, a little earlier. And he looks at a case with Moses and Aaron in Exodus, when Moses meets Aaron coming to greet him after the burning bush, and Aaron went and met him and kissed him. And interestingly, this is what Beno Jacob notices, and why we read what we read here, that it's suspect. Because he says that none of the other encounters that he looks at are accompanied by such a display of effusiveness. The hugging and the kissing and the weeping, that it has all, and the falling on the neck. And so he actually has some skepticism. We'll look at Rashi, because Rashi actually pulls from the commentaries in the Midrash that we said, but Rashi also living in a time where Jews were not, you know, allowed to be citizens, let's say, or you know, full members of the society. He quotes Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai as saying, although it is an immutable rule that Esav hates Jacob, and that is kind of the rule that the commentators follow, at that moment his mercy was aroused and he kissed Jacob with all his heart. And I read these last ones out. So I ask you, we looked, you know, what's bothering, hopefully it's evident what's bothering Rashi, or what's bothering the commentators. This was the first rule, or the first element of the methodology. This word that was bothering the Masoretes, vayeshakehu, that he embraced him. That notion that Esav could embrace and kiss Yaakov, that's the challenge. That's the concern. Now we've looked at a variety of different commentators. We've seen kind of two, you know, points. Does anyone want to share anything they feel are pluses or minuses of either of the two commentaries? Yeah, Gloria.
What's confusing me is that these are brothers, but they have them on different poles.
Right. No, so it's true. Right. So Jewish tradition, basically puts them on two different poles. They're not only, they're twins actually, right? They're, but right, that they're on a completely different poles. And, we do see in the Torah that Jacob kind of takes the birthright, the blessing that's meant for Esav, or that at least Yitzchak intends to give to Esav. Whether he deserves it or not, that's a separate question. And Esav hates him and wants to kill him. But now, right, 20 years later, we see a different Esav, potentially. We see an Esav embracing. But the commentary and the understanding of Esav as this archetype prevents Jewish tradition afterwards from seeing Esav as anything but evil. And we only see in these more recent commentaries, the 1800s, and when the world is kind of modernizing, this sense that, oh, maybe Esav could be turning towards good. It's not something that we see in earlier commentaries. So no, it's a great point, and I hope that none of us have siblings that we feel are the arch enemy. But that is how the Torah. I would argue it's not how the Torah views the two of them, but it's how Jewish tradition interprets them. And Nachama Liebowitz actually ends her worksheet with this last message of Beno Jacob, saying the day would come when Esau, and there are many types of Esau's, I think that's an important line, would come to Jacob to Mount Zion. That there would be times, we are often apart from our enemies or from the other, but there are going to be plenty of times where we come together. And she finishes, in terms of the pluses and minuses, she kind of lets her student judge that for him or herself. But she kind of finishes all of her worksheets with questions for further study. And I'll just share a couple of them with you, because she doesn't want to give the answers. She might have answers for herself, but her methodology and part of why she does reach so many people is because she really pushes the student to try to find the answers for themselves. So she starts with, more kind of simple, plain meaning questions, right? What caused Esau's change of heart? Was it the gifts? Jacob, we didn't read this part, but Jacob sends gifts in advance to Esau. Was it the gift that changed his heart, or was it something else? Of Esau's and Jacob's remarks, Esau said, I have enough, my brother. And Jacob said, because God hath dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. Right? What difference do you detect in their words, and what does it teach you regarding their respective characters? She's looking at what they say to each other in conversation afterwards, and wants you to think about the words and how it informs their character. Yeah, Jacqueline.
They were both successful in their lives, and so they didn't have a reason to be jealous of one another, because one didn't have more than the other. They were both successful. They had families, they had children, they had, lands. So they were both prosperous men who had succeeded in building lives for themselves.
Good, right. In this case, right. And I think that's a great message here, right? That just because we're on different poles, right, so to speak, right, we can both be successful, and we can both, right, we can both move forward. And the Torah, views Esau as successful. And I'll actually add that the Torah and later Jewish commentary feels like anyone who's Abraham's seed almost by definition becomes successful, becomes the progenitor of a nation. We see that already with Abraham, has Isaac and Hagar. Sarah kind of tells him to banish his handmaiden Hagar and his first child by her, Ishmael, and Abraham is hesitant to do so. This is his child, and God says, don't worry, I will be with him. And Ishmael becomes the leader of a great nation. In fact, we see, according to tradition, Ishmael becomes the father of Islam. It becomes kind of the progenitor of what becomes Islam today. And Esau is also the seed of Abraham, through Isaac. we can't just say Esav, you know, the Torah talks about the great nations. So the later commentary says, oh, Esav must be the progenitor of Rome. So any of the great nations, you know, in history are rooted in the Jewish understanding from Abraham. So yes, we don't need, everyone can have success.
It doesn't have to be at the expense of somebody else.
Well, that's right. That's how I would like to see it. And I think that's, you know, how modern commentators in our world view this. Yeah, Terry. You want...
Rather than using the word success, it's blessings. They both had blessings when the fight originally was to get the blessing of their father, and maybe in some ways it's really reflecting then that God was blessing both of them. Like it wasn't fighting about, you know, what your father did or didn't do and favoring you. And just by you even bringing up that Ishmael and Abraham, and that's maybe the biggest wrestling thing that could have happened then, and maybe even still now in the text, is that God does say, you know, all the Jewish people are chosen, they were his beloved people, but God also loves all these other groups and
Right.
such.
No, beautiful. Right. That we're the, you know, our people are blessed and chosen, you know, for the blessings that are for our people, but God there's blessing for everyone. Right. I think that's beautiful.
Enough to go around.
Right. Enough to go around. Judy, did you have?
Yes. Yeah. What bothers me is that yes, they embrace and kiss, but then they part. They never see each other again.
Right. So you know what? They do see each other one other time when they bury their father, Isaac, together. We have one more point later on where they meet. But you're correct that they go their separate ways and lead their separate lives and really don't interact after this story. And right, you could read into that, oh, they really don't like each other, right? Could also read that they both basically have, we say Jacob and Esau, but even in the text, they have, you know, a very large community of people that are with them. Jacob and his family alone is a lot of people, and his servants, and Esau, they talk about all of the men and all of the people that are with him. They almost already represent communities in the text itself. But great point, and you know, from a modern understanding, it is bothersome, and I agree with you that you know, these two siblings aren't together. And I can, you know, you can think about that. But I want to wrap up. I know it's 8:30, you know, with this message. Nachama Liebowitz uses her style to look at the different commentaries and bring us, you know, through questions, one, to try to understand this on our own, and to try to figure out how we can understand this for our own lives today. But she brings this verse, which is ostensibly about Jacob and Esau's embrace, and brings it to, you know, the Jacobs of our day, which is the Jewish people, and the Esau's of our day, which are our neighbors. And, you know, where she ends, you know, leaves it to us to kind of determine what the right answer is, or not the right answer, you know, how we understand our own relations with our neighbors today, but leaves the possibility that perhaps we don't always need to be at odds. We don't always need to be at polar opposites, that perhaps there is the potential for revolution, and a potential that those who were once our enemies, you know, may find it in them, and we may find it, you know, in ourselves, to bring us closer together one day. And God willing, those who seek to harm us today, or seek to not have something to do with us today, will find ways to come closer to us. And hopefully, you know, in that day, we will find it in our heart, if we see sincerity on the other side, to find a way to be sincere in bridging that gap and coming closer to our neighbors that perhaps we are not as close with today.
Amen.
So may it be, right? May the time come soon in today's world, you know, all the more so. So we wish everyone a good night. Any last thoughts from anyone? All right,
You
so
can all eat Hamantaschen.
yeah, and enjoy Chag Sameach, right? We'll see those of you on Purim. We're coming next week is the final session here, and the following week, Rabbi Carney Rose will begin a 3-part series on Passover and preparation for Passover, and that's in person. It's a hybrid, so you can join, but I encourage anyone who's able to also join in person. It'll be both in person and on Zoom. So thank you. Take care and good evening.